Hello and welcome back to Whitney Alex Works recap of The Bachelorette Season 19, Episode 9 and 10, Fantasy Suites Part 1 and 2. Rachel and Gabby head to Riviera Maya, Mexico, located on the Yucatan Peninsula for fantasy suites. Each bachelorette has 3 men left, each with their own version of what a future with Gabby or Rachel would look like. And difficult decisions are made as feelings and emotions are at an all-time high. And I should take a second to give props to the franchise for finally separating the contestants for fantasy suites like the good old days. So cheers to that. Before we begin, please like and subscribe here at Whitney Alex Works for more recap videos just like this one. Alright, let's dive into Gabby and Rachel's fantasy suites. We start the Fantasy Suites episode with a major recap as it's been 2 weeks since Hometowns aired. Gabby and Rachel sit down to talk about the remaining men and where they stand with each one. Both bachelorettes reflect on their time on Clayton's season where everything came crashing down, and Gabby and Rachel are worried about making it through their own fantasy suites unscathed. But there are a few worries that come to light. First, with Rachel, she is concerned about Tino and how his hometown went with his parents not being able to give their support, and this really bothers her. And with Gabby, she is very concerned with how Jason feels since he has been rather quiet about his true feelings, but we learn from Hometowns that Jason cannot see himself getting engaged, but he has yet to tell Gabby this important bit of information. Well, both Gabby and Rachel are excited about overnights as this is an opportunity to really explore their relationships as they get a chance to have uninterrupted time off screen that is invaluable at this point in the journey. The first date for Fantasy Suites goes to Gabby and Eric. They have grown extremely close after their emotional hometown date where Gabby met Eric's father, who sadly passed after filming after battling cancer for 3 years. When Gabby and Eric meet up, they hug and kiss, and they are really excited to see each other. They joke that this is their first date without a family member present, and they head to a place called Lover's Leap, where they can jump off a platform into the waters down below. They jump off the lowest and then medium level platforms with ease, but when it comes to the highest jump, Gabby gets pretty scared. It's a struggle to make the highest jump, but Eric comforts Gabby, which she appreciates, and eventually through sheer will and determination, they make the jump together and end up even closer. After their adrenaline-inducing jump, they sit down and sip some champagne. Gabby and Eric reflect on Eric's emotional hometown date and how they have grown so much closer. There is an intense connection between these two that I found myself thinking that there is no way Johnny or even Jason could match the romance between these two, but of course anything could happen. We head to the nighttime portion of Eric's fantasy suite date, and Eric and Gabby sit down to talk about their deep connection even further. After more reflections about how well Eric's hometown date went, Eric tells Gabby that he doesn't want to leave the show without her, and both tell each other that they are falling in love. Gabby then pulls out the fantasy suite invite and asks Eric to spend the night together, away from the camera, just them. Eric accepts, and they spend the night having meaningful time together. We catch back up with them in the morning where Gabby and Eric are in a state of bliss, but reality creeps back in as Eric knows despite his intense feelings, there are 2 other men still there to compete for Gabby's heart. And Eric is having a hard time letting Gabby go as the intensity between the two continues as they know they have to say goodbye even though they both don't want to. Meanwhile, we see Rachel's first fantasy suite date and she chooses Avon. Avon and Rachel had a nice hometown date and they are both still on a high from how well meeting Avon's parents went. They head out on a boat where they spend the day together and reflect on how well hometowns went. We then head to the nighttime portion where Rachel tells Avon that she is falling in love with him and tells Avon that she only waited to tell him because she didn't want to throw the love word around recklessly. But she is in love with Avon and they are very serious about each other. And Rachel needs to ask Avon something. Is he ready for an engagement in only 2 weeks? Avon says without a doubt he is ready and he is all in on Rachel. And Rachel then invites Avon into the fantasy suites where he says yes and they spend the night together. In the morning, we see the happy couple as they admit they are both on a high and they say the relationship feels natural. Avon is falling in love, Rachel is falling in love, but there is again 2 other men Rachel is currently dating, so the bliss between these two can't last forever. Next up for Rachel is her date with Tino. But before this date, all throughout Avon's fantasy suites, we saw the struggle Tino was facing as he was completely lovesick, knowing that Rachel is still with other men still. He even tells this to Jesse Palmer as he is struggling with his emotions. But when Tino and Rachel finally meet up for their date, they are happy to see each other. Rachel and Tino go horseback riding and enjoy a similar date to Gabby and Eric, where they spend the day next to a watering hole. But the romance is put on hold as Rachel tells Tino the truth, that she is completely nervous about not having Tino's parents' support, and that really bothers her. Heading into the nighttime portion, Rachel is still contending with the truth that Tino's parents might not support their relationship, and with poor Tino sweating because of the tropical humidity, he tries to quell Rachel's nerves by telling her that he is all in on her, and if they continue their relationship, his parents will eventually get on board because it's what Tino wants. He says something identical to what Eric told Gabby and tells Rachel that he doesn't want to leave the show without her, and Rachel is swooning as she feels that maybe her and Tino can move past that awkward hometown date and move forward with their feelings for each other. Tino tells Rachel that he loves her, and Rachel tells Tino that she is in love with him. Rachel then invites Tino into the fantasy suites, and of course he says yes. They spend the night together, and everything seems to be progressing with these two. And this, of course, complicates Rachel's feelings as she has now told 2 men that she is in love with them. Okay, so switching gears to Gabby and Johnny's date, and okay, before I begin, it was hard to take this date seriously when the Bachelor in Paradise Season 8's promo literally showed Johnny on the beaches of paradise right before this footage was aired, so you know Johnny was doomed. Well, with that in mind, let's see how Gabby and Johnny break it off. We see them meet up on the beach and they reflect on how Johnny's hometown date went. It went pretty well, but Johnny is struggling to open up further with Gabby as he is hopeful for a future with her, but can't seem to progress to an engagement. Gabby understands this and they realize that despite their romantic connection, they aren't meant to be together, and while that is hard to hear, it's the truth. Gabby is emotional, but she understands that letting Johnny go means she can now focus on her relationships with Eric and Jason. And with that, Johnny is heading home, and really he's heading to the beaches of paradise. So with that, 5 men remain. And to wrap up part 1 of the fantasy suites, we as the audience know that Jason is conflicted and doesn't see himself getting engaged this soon, but Gabby is not aware of this and believes that both Eric and Jason are ready for an engagement. We then see Gabby journaling, and she gets a letter that asks her to meet this unknown person who wants to see her. She gets ready, not knowing who or what to expect, and she finds out it's Eric who is eager to see her. But it's not all romance and bliss, as Eric is letting his insecurities get the better of him, and he tells Gabby that he doesn't want her to be intimate with anyone else. But hearing this makes Gabby upset, as she admits that Eric told her in the fantasy suites that this week feels like she is cheating, and she doesn't respect the fact that he is bringing this up again publicly this time. Gabby feels pressured and she doesn't want to defend herself and her actions, and she is pretty crushed. She wants Eric to trust her, but she is starting to question everything, and then she walks away from Eric completely upset. Part 2 of Fantasy Suite starts right where we left off. Eric admits that he messed up putting pressure on Gabby not to be intimate with other men, but eventually Gabby comes back and gives Eric a hug. He apologizes, but there is still some concern between the two, as we really don't see any true resolution between these two right now. The intensity between these two just needs to simmer. In the morning, Gabby admits she is emotionally exhausted and talks to host Jesse Palmer about it. She feels confused as everything was fine up until last night with Eric, and she feels like Eric may be too good to be true. She wants this journey to be her decision, and she reflects that she has an upcoming date with Jason. Gabby says she is falling in love with Jason, and she thinks he feels the same way. But we already saw Jason admit to Jesse Palmer that he has some doubts about getting engaged in less than 2 weeks to Gabby. Next, we see Gabby and Jason meet up. They head out for a fun and enjoyable tennis date. There is a lot of kissing and hugging and laughing as the two of them are really just enjoying each other's company. And things are honestly going great, but there is something festering underneath all this bliss and joy. When we see Gabby and Jason next, they are headed to the nighttime portion of their date, and finally, when they sit down, Jason tells Gabby that he has something to say to her. He admits that he isn't comfortable with the bubble atmosphere and cameras on him all the time, and he says that he isn't ready to get engaged to her in less than 2 weeks. Gabby is shocked but tries to understand where Jason is coming from and asks him if he can see the relationship going further outside of the show. And Jason isn't so sure. He even says he doesn't really know Gabby. Upon hearing all this, Gabby gets up and has to take a second. Then Jason comes over and tries to explain himself further. He tells her that he does see her in his future. He just, again, can't see himself in this bubble environment. And Gabby is starting to see the truth about Jason, that he isn't really that into her despite what he's been saying all season. But they do decide that maybe with Fantasy Suites and with the cameras off, they can really get to the bottom of what they want out of their relationship. And so Gabby and Jason head off and they are hopeful for the future. But in the morning, we see a sad Gabby, and she says she is hurt and devastated. With the cameras off, things between them didn't change. In fact, they got worse. Gabby then heads over to Jason's room to break up with him. She tells Jason that she feels hurt and led on, and she wants someone who wants to be with her wholeheartedly. And with that, Jason, the investment banker, is heading home, leaving 4 men remaining overall, and just 1 man left for Gabby, which is Eric. And with Jason's departure, Gabby is really upset, feeling completely fooled by Jason and how she was blindsided by what Jason's true feelings actually were. So more on Gabby in a second. We then head back to see Rachel and Zach's fantasy suite date, where they meet up and spend the day exploring the town of Riviera Maya. They drink tequila, spend the day shopping at local boutiques, and eating grasshoppers for fun. They also see a tarot card reader and dance to a mariachi band. And when it's nighttime, Zach is still all in on Rachel, but Rachel seems to be more hesitant with her relationship with Zach now, citing the tarot card reader as she was described as being unsure of her feelings. Well, that's obvious as Rachel is having to sort out her feelings between her final 3 men, and she does admit to Zach that she is conflicted. But Zach assures her that he is in love with her, and Rachel eventually invites Zach to spend the night together. But when it's morning, it's awkward as something strange occurred in the fantasy suites. We learn from Zach that Rachel seemed unauthentic with him on overnights, as she was concerned that Zach wasn't ready for an engagement all of a sudden, citing his age of being just 25. But Rachel is only 26, and of course that excuse seems a bit odd. In my own opinion, it seems like Zach was the odd man out, and Rachel had to be reserved with him if her heart was leaning with Avon or Tino, but all of this conflict really affects Zach. And after Fantasy Suites, Zach heads over to talk to host Jesse Palmer about everything that happened. Of course, it's odd that Rachel doesn't think Zach is ready for an engagement, citing only his age, and Zach is truly upset. He doesn't know what to do, but he wants to talk to Rachel before the rose ceremony. Meanwhile, we switch over to Gabby and her story as Eric is suddenly the only guy left, but she is having doubts about the whole journey and she is taking some time to process everything. She then heads over to Eric's room and tells him what has been going on and reveals that he is the only man left. Eric is over the moon as they tell each other that they love each other and that everything feels right, but we still have some unanswered questions with these two as there seems to be a big fight previewed for the finale, but for now it's safe to say Eric is Gabby's final pick. But will they get engaged? And with that question lingering, we head back to Rachel. She arrives at the rose ceremony and Jesse tells her that she is the only bachelorette there. This shocks Rachel, but she understands that this is her journey and she has to see her side through. She heads into the rose ceremony, and before any roses can be handed out, Zach asks to talk to Rachel, hoping to resolve his concerns about what happened in the fantasy suites. And with that, we suddenly switch to Jesse Palmer in a studio telling us that we will have to see how this season will end, with the 2-part live finale event happening Tuesday, September 13th and finishing on the 20th. So that's it for this 2-part Fantasy Suite episode, where we are left with a pretty big cliffhanger, but gladly things seem to be wrapping up soon. Thank you for watching Whitney Alex Works' recap of The Bachelorette Season 19, Episode 9 and 10, The Fantasy Suites. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe at Whitney Alex Works for more videos in the future. See you next week for Part 1 of the live finale, which airs on Tuesday, September 13th.